Hey, fifth grade. This week we are reading a bunch of read aloud stories for shared reading, and your teachers and I wanted to kind of double up and do some stories that relate to the civil rights movement. It's a very important time in our history. It didn't happen all that long ago, though I'm sure a lot of maybe like your grandparents or great grandparents remember the time. And so today I'll be reading you the book Happy Birthday, Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. is probably one of the most famous people during the civil rights movement. He was super influential. He did a lot of really great stuff during that time. So this book tells us a little bit about his history. And what else can I say about him? There's a lot of statues and monuments around the United States that celebrate him. And yeah, let's learn a little bit about him. Happy birthday, Martin Luther King Jr. I'm gonna see which side of the screen this is best on. Here. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15th, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia. His parents loved him very much. So you may remember there's usually a day, one Monday in January that we have off. It celebrates Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. Martin Luther King had the same name as his father, except for one thing. His father was called Martin Luther King Sr. Martin was called Martin Luther King Jr. Martin went to elementary school, high school, and college in Atlanta. He was a good student. Later, he went to divinity school in Pennsylvania. So divinity school is the kind of school for like if you want to be a pastor or a priest or like a religious figure. So that's what he went to study after high school. Martin became a pastor, just like his dad. So that picture there shows him and his dad at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. They were both called Reverend. The Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. and the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Martin's job as a minister was to help people in need. He visited sick people in the hospital and he made them feel better. He asked people not to fight with each other. He said that there were peaceful ways to solve problems. And like his father, Martin led people in prayer and song. You see here, he is in church. Now, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. is famous because he helped our country change some of its laws. A law is like a rule. Once there was a law in some places that said only white people could sit in front of a bus and that black people had to sit in the back. Martin Luther King said this law needed to be changed. Rosa Parks and other people helped him change it. Now all people can sit in any empty seat they like. So it was like one of those little things, but it was a little unfair, and he worked to help change it with Rosa Parks. Once there were laws in some places that said that African Americans could only use certain restaurants and drinking fountains. Martin Luther King and many other people helped change these laws. Now all people can share the same restaurants and drinking fountains. So you see here that once there was water fountains that were marked for like white and colored. Okay. And now we know that we can all drink out of the same water fountain. It's fine. That was a law before and they helped to change it. Once there was a law in some places that said that black children and white children couldn't go to school together. Martin Luther King and other people included many including many very brave children, had this law changed too. Now, black children and white children can go to school together, just like our school. Isn't that awesome? Martin Luther King had a special talent for leadership. When he spoke, people listened. Poor people, rich people, white people, black people, and people from all around the world listened when Martin Luther King Jr. spoke. Many helped him work, march, sing, and pray for justice. You don't know what justice is? It's like fairness. They all worked, fought, and prayed for things to be fair for everybody. This is like a super famous part of his history. In the summer of 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. gave the most famous speech of his life. He gave it outdoors to 250,000 people who had come to Washington, D.C. to ask the president for jobs and freedom for Black people. In his speech, Martin Luther King said that he had a dream. His dream was that people everywhere would learn to live together without being mean to one another. Look at all these people here that came to see him. And if you've ever heard of it, the speech is called the I Have a Dream speech. It's very famous. Speech. Martin Luther King wanted people to be able to go places together, to share food together, and to love one another in peace. Because he worked so hard for freedom and helped so many people gain it, we honor him every year on his special day. We call this day Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and we say to him, Happy birthday, Martin Luther King. So he was a leader in a lot of those big changes in our laws that help us enjoy the world that we have today. Today, we all depend, regardless of if you're white or black or Latino or Asian, we can all go to the same school and play on the same playgrounds and go to the same restaurants and use the same drinking fountains and buses and bathrooms. That wasn't allowed before. Like I say long ago, by that I mean maybe like 60 years ago. Okay. So less than 100 years ago, right? Like just 60 years ago, which really isn't that long, there were laws in place to keep us apart. And Martin Luther King was one of the leaders of really working and getting people together to stop and listen and change those laws. So I'm so glad that we can celebrate such an amazing man. And he was super important in the civil rights movement. I hope you enjoyed the story.